the question I had is, what role does time play in this? Are we kind of like, are we looking across time as well as space? When in our search for extraterrestrial life, what do you say about that?
So I think so. Firstly, just to come back to the terraforming timescales,
Mm,
I mean, the optimists have a shorter timescale. They might invoke thousands of years. All I can say about millions is that's how long it took life on Earth to essentially terraform the Earth, to turn the Earth from a planet with a carbon dioxide atmosphere to one with a 20% oxygen atmosphere. I mean, that took millions of years. But technically, if one really wanted to do it, probably we could speed it up. And the technologically and the optimists think thousands of years. Um, the the times I'm saying depends on the relevance of time depends really on what we're talking about, I think. I mean, the the if we just take the Milky Way galaxy, then we know it's got 100,000 million stars in it, and we know it's about 13,000 million years old. So it's almost three times as old as our planet. So this does mean that the history of the galaxy, there's been time, all the things that we're talking about now that humans might do in the future, had technically capable life evolved in the earlier history of the galaxy, there's been more. I mean, all of this could have played out in the past, right? There's been enough time for intelligent. Again, I almost use the word civilizations, technically capable um, um, organisms to develop spacefaring technology, terraforming technology, even if it does take them a million years to terraform a planet. The galaxy is thousands of millions of years older than the Earth. So they could have been doing all of this before the Earth even formed. Never mind before humans evolved, right? But then this brings us back to Fermi's question. If they were all there doing this billions of years ago, isn't it strange that when we look out into the sky today, we don't see any of it? We don't see any evidence of terraformed planets. We're pretty confident they never terraformed our planet for their own purposes, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. Nor have they interfered with any of the other planets in our solar system. And anyway, the point is, we look out into the sky today and we can see a lot of interesting astrophysics going on, but we can't see any evidence of minds at work. And arguably, we should be able to do that. Given the deep history of the galaxy, given that there's been so much time for these earlier civilizations to have, so I use the civilization word, these earlier technically capable civilizations to develop and start for themselves expanding out into space and for them to start terraforming things. Wouldn't we notice? Maybe not, but I still think that, I mean, the great silence sort of presses upon us a bit. It's a bit difficult to reconcile a history of the galaxy where all this had been going on for billions and billions of years is a bit difficult to reconcile with, the absence of evidence that the great silence that we're faced with.
yeah, no, I agree, and I think it makes it difficult to even ponder, like, because I think you are right. When you look out the time scale you're mentioning and the size you're mentioning is mind-boggling for me. Like even thousands and millions of years, human beings, like you said, can't really comprehend that level of like that larger number. So it really makes it a question where when you're questioning this, and more of it's a philosophical pondering. If it was in the future, not us, but another civilization in the future could make this happen, would they find what would they find almost? But I think it's interesting to ask those questions because it says a lot, like we mentioned at the beginning, about our relationship to the like the wider universe and to the wider kind of scope and how evolution of life is even developing. You mentioned something before at the beginning about maybe is the case where life is just that unique um in terms of how it's structured and how evolution has made human beings to be. how likely is that? Is it, as an answer to like the great silence, is it that just how we're just very, very unique and like not to, I'm very careful of making human beings kind of like above in any kind of in any sense of the word, any other organism, but it's just that how human beings are unique in that sense. How likely is that?
So the honest answer is, I mean, we just don't know, right? We just don't, and we can't know until we start finding other examples of life, or we search so many places and we keep not finding life, despite having searched hundreds and hundreds of planets, and we never find life. Then we're going to start to think that, yeah, life is pretty rare. Um, I think there are several things for several reasons for thinking why life might be rare, actually. So it goes back to these so-called hard steps that I mentioned earlier. So the first thing is life has to arise from non-life. Now, no one knows how that happened. Even the most simple life we're familiar with is vastly, vastly, vastly complicated than than any non-biological chemical process. So somehow, from a non-living world, this tremendous complexity that is packaged within a single cell had to appear, construct itself, presumably, without any pre-existing life. So in some geochemical way, that might be really, really hard. We don't know, but we haven't found any other evidences of the independent origin of life. All life on Earth is related. All life on Earth shares a common ancestor. All life on Earth has the same basic biochemistry because we share a common ancestor. So life's got started from non-life somehow on this planet, and then it's evolved since into all its myriad diversity. But the origin of life might be very rare. Even if the origin of life is not very rare, you can then look at the history of life on Earth and you can see some other hard steps. So, for example, human beings and all animals are made of a pretty complicated type of cell, so-called eukaryotes, which are cells with nuclei. And in our nuclei of our cells, this is where our DNA is. Simpler forms of life, so-called prokaryotes, like bacteria, I mean, they don't have nuclei. So the earliest common ancestor of life on Earth would have been something like a bacterium. However, at some point, these prokaryotic cells evolved to become eukaryotic cells with a nucleus and all sorts of additional internal complexities. That might have been a very hard step. Since all animals are built from eukaryotic cells, it implies that unless you could make eukaryotic cells, you're not going to have anything at an animal level of complexity. And by that, I mean anything from a jellyfish upwards, right? All animals are based on eukaryotic cells. Then once you've finally got the eukaryotic cells evolved, you've got then they have to learn how to cooperate in multiples. Multicellular life has to evolve, right? Because I mean, there are plenty of single-celled eukaryotes. So these are called protists. But at some point, some single-celled eukaryotes started to cooperate with other eukaryotic cells to make multi-celled entities, which these days we largely know of as animals. And then, so that's a hard step. If you need something with an animal level of complexity to make spaceships or radio telescopes or to terraform planets or whatnot, then that would account why these things might be rare. But then you can go on up the chain. There's consciousness. Where does consciousness arise? I mean, human beings are conscious. Probably other animals on this planet are conscious, but to the same extent, who knows? Is consciousness required before you can start developing a technology? I mean, maybe consciousness, somehow these cells, which are just doing complicated chemical reactions, at least in some life forms, have become conscious. So that could be a very hard step.
A question
So
on that then.
all of these hard steps, right?
Mm.
And each one of them, or several of them in combination, yeah, they could explain the Great Silence because to get technologically capable life, you've had to go through this, jump through all of these hoops of hard steps, and this could result in the end product being very rare. Sorry, you were gonna
No, I was
say
gonna on that point because you're making a very fantastic point about the difficulty of it. But I had a question of which step do you think was the hardest? Which step on that kind of life, kind of evolutionary, kind of a chain, would you think is the most amazing? You know, we can look at it like that,
something.
where it's like, I can't believe this actually happened.